Somalia and Kenya are fighting over a piece of the Indian Ocean, and it's getting heated. At stake, an area of approximately 100,000 square kilometers, believed to contain potentially valuable oil and gas resources. The International Court of Justice ruled in Somalia's favor back in October 2021, but Kenya rejected the ruling, calling it biased.
Kenya wishes to indicate that it rejects in totality and does not recognize the findings in the decision.
Since then, both sides have engaged in on and off talks, but the dispute remains unresolved. Now, with Somalia gaining confidence from new alliances with Egypt and Turkey, the dynamics are shifting. This is the story of the Somalia-Kenya maritime dispute. What happened, why it matters, and what comes next. Let me start with the basics. Somalia and Kenya disagree over their maritime border in the Indian Ocean. The disputed area covers approximately 100,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of the country of Iceland. Why does this matter? Because the area is believed to contain potentially valuable oil and gas resources. Both countries want control over these resources. The dispute dates back to 2009, when the two countries signed a memorandum of understanding to negotiate their maritime border. But the negotiations failed to produce an agreement. In 2014, Somalia took the case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Kenya challenged the court's jurisdiction, but was rejected. For years, the case moved slowly through the court system. Hearings finally began in 2019. In 2020, Kenya announced it would no longer participate in the proceedings, calling the process biased. Then, on October 12, 2021, the ICJ delivered its final ruling. The court drew the maritime border mostly in Somalia's favor. Kenya rejected the ruling immediately and maintained that the ICJ process was biased. Since then, both countries have engaged in bilateral talks to resolve the dispute, but no breakthrough has been achieved. So why is this story relevant today? Several factors make this dispute more urgent now than ever. First, Somalia's new confidence. In recent years, Somalia has secured significant alliances. It has signed defense deals with Egypt and Turkey. It has received military support from these countries. This has given Mogadishu renewed confidence in its international position. Second, the ICJ ruling remains unenforced. Despite the ICJ ruling in Somalia's favor, Kenya refuses to accept it. The court has no direct enforcement mechanism, so the border remains disputed and the resources remain untapped. Third, regional competition is intensifying. The Horn of Africa is becoming a theater of growing regional competition. Egypt, Turkey, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia are all seeking influence. Some analysts believe Somalia's growing ties with Egypt and Turkey could influence regional power dynamics. Fourth, economic stakes are high. The disputed area is believed to contain potentially valuable oil and gas resources. For Somalia, which remains one of the world's poorest countries, these resources could transform its economy. For Kenya, which is already a regional economic powerhouse, they could further boost its growth. Both sides have everything to gain and everything to lose. Let me present Kenya's perspective, because it's important to understand why this dispute persists. Kenya argues that the maritime border should follow an eastward line, roughly parallel to the coast. Somalia argues for a southeastward line, giving it more territory. The ICJ largely supported Somalia's position. Kenya rejected this, calling the ruling biased and flawed. Kenya has several concerns. First, the ruling would reduce Kenya's access to parts of the disputed maritime area, potentially affecting future fishing and energy opportunities. Second, Kenya argues that the ICJ did not properly consider its historical claims to the territory. Third, Kenya sees the ruling as part of a broader disagreement over how international courts interpret maritime boundaries. Kenya has also taken concrete actions. It boycotted parts of the proceedings and has continued to pursue diplomatic engagement with Somalia rather than accepting the ruling. So far, the dispute remains unresolved. Now, let me present Somalia's perspective. Somalia argues that it has the stronger legal case. The ICJ ruling confirmed this. The court evaluated the evidence and determined that the maritime border should largely follow Somalia's claimed line. Somalia also argues that it has been patient. It went through the legal process. It waited years for the ICJ to rule, and it is entitled to rely on that ruling. But there is a practical reality. Somalia cannot enforce the ruling on its own. It needs international support, and so far implementation has remained limited. This is why Somalia's new alliances matter. With Egypt and Turkey now aligned with Mogadishu, Somalia has more leverage in regional affairs. So where does this leave the Somalia-Kenya maritime dispute? The ICJ ruled in Somalia's favor in October 2021. Kenya rejected the ruling. The dispute remains unresolved. Both sides have engaged in bilateral talks since 2022, but no breakthrough has been achieved. Now, with Somalia's new alliances with Egypt and Turkey, the dynamics are shifting. Mogadishu is more confident. Nairobi is watching developments closely. Will Kenya eventually accept the ICJ ruling? Will Somalia push for greater implementation? Or will both sides continue talking without resolution? The stakes are high. The resources could be worth billions if commercially viable reserves are confirmed. And the Horn of Africa is watching. That is your Horn Business Insight. If you want to understand how Somalia's new confidence could reshape the Horn of Africa,